15 years ago, a human boy made a vow to an alien girl beneath the ruins of a dying world. He promised he'd return, not for glory, not for war, but for her. Now, against every law, every order, and every warning, he's back. But the girl he left behind is no longer hiding. She's a leader, and choosing him could ignite a war. In a world where love is forbidden and promises are buried by power, one vow is about to change everything. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The wind howled across the burnt plains of Lunera, a quiet and broken moon circling a forgotten world. Black smoke still curled from the remains of shattered machines and fallen skyships. Ash floated gently through the air, landing softly on cracked ground that used to be green. Where once there were crystal gardens and silver rivers, now there was only silence and ruins. It was the end of another skirmish between two distant species who had long forgotten what peace felt like. Kyle was only 14, too young to wear a uniform that heavy and too soft-hearted for war. He had been assigned to a tech crew, nothing more than a helper who fixed wires and sorted equipment. But during the confusion of the last ambush, he got separated. The transport exploded. Alarms screamed. And now he wandered alone, lost, with no radio signal, no food, and no idea if anyone even knew he was alive. He stumbled through twisted metal and broken pillars until he found shelter beneath what looked like an old observatory. The domed roof had fallen in, leaving the upper level wide open to the sky, but the lower halls were still intact, shadowed and cool. As he climbed over debris and entered the largest chamber, he stopped. He wasn't alone. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but then he saw her, tucked in the shadows between a shattered wall and a fallen data console. She didn't move. Her skin had a pale blue hue, and her silver eyes shimmered softly, watching him with quiet fear. She looked no older than 10, thin and tired, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her clothes were torn, and dust covered her from head to toe. But what struck him most was her silence. She didn't cry or run. She simply stared. Kyle raised his hands slowly, trying to look small and harmless. He didn't have a weapon, only a half-used ration pack and a broken heat lamp tied to his belt. He took a careful step forward and reached into his jacket. She tensed. He stopped and slowly pulled out the crushed ration bar. He held it out, offering it wordlessly. "You look cold," he said quietly. His voice cracked from dryness. She didn't answer. For a moment he thought she might bolt, but instead, she slowly unwrapped her arms and inched forward. Her movements were careful, as if the world might fall apart with one wrong step. She reached out and took the ration bar. Then, still without a word, she backed away into the dark. Kale didn't push. He just sat down, a safe distance away, leaning against the opposite wall. He took off his coat and slid it across the floor toward her. She hesitated, then pulled it into her corner. They didn't speak after that. The shadows grew deeper and the night settled in. He stayed with her for 2 days. Neither of them said much. She didn't tell him her name, and he didn't ask. They shared what little food he had and passed the time in silence. Kyle tried not to sleep, but when he did, he always woke with the feeling that she had been watching, making sure he was still there. On the third night, as the stars blinked through the broken roof, she finally spoke. "You're not like the others," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Kyle looked up at her. His face was tired, but his eyes were kind. He nodded, slowly. "You're not either." Something shifted between them after that. A fragile thread of trust formed, built not on words but on shared silence, shared fear. Patrols started sweeping the area again. The noise of hovercrafts and distant gunfire came closer. Kale knew it was only a matter of time before they were found. He had to leave. He didn't want to, but if he stayed, they'd both be captured. Or worse. On the morning of the third day, he packed up his things slowly. She sat nearby, pretending not to watch, but he knew she felt it, the end of something, before stepping away, Kale knelt down and pulled something from his tool pouch. A small piece of copper wire he had shaped into a crude ring. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't pretty, but it meant something. He held it out to her. She stared at it, confused. "If I make it out," he said softly, "I'll come back for you. And when I do, I'll marry you. That's a promise." He didn't wait for an answer. There wasn't time. Sirens wailed in the distance. A light flashed through the cracks in the observatory walls. Then the blast came. An explosion from nearby rocked the chamber and filled the air with dust and noise. He turned to grab her, but everything went black. Kale woke days later in a medical pod. The white lights were blinding. A nurse leaned over him, checking vitals, speaking softly. But he didn't hear her. His first thought wasn't of the war, or the mission, or the pain in his side. His first thought was of her, of a girl with silver eyes hiding in the dark, of a ring made from copper wire, and a vow whispered beneath falling stars. 15 years had passed, but Kale Myron never forgot the girl beneath the ruins. The memory of her silver eyes still lived in the corners of his mind, sharper than any battlefield or mission report. Most people thought memories faded with time. His didn't. They followed him, through every order, every mission, every long, sleepless night staring out at the stars. Now, standing on the bridge of his scout vessel, he stared down at the moon that had haunted his dreams. Lunera, the planet, looked different from above. New lights marked old cities. Rebuilt towers glimmered with soft blue glow. But Kale wasn't looking for progress or politics. He was looking for a single face, one that probably hadn't thought of him in years. His pilot read off their assignment. Standard recon. Check for energy spikes near the old valley. Report back. No contact with locals. Kale nodded, but in his mind he had already changed the plan. They called him Captain now. His voice carried weight, but deep inside, he still felt like the boy who had once given away his coat and a crushed ration bar, the boy who had promised to return. As his ship descended into Lunera's cloudy atmosphere, a soft voice echoed in his head. "I'll come back for you." He hadn't said it for show. He had meant it. Far across the sky, high above the glowing cliffs, Sirayan stood inside a tower carved from pale stone and glass. She had grown strong in the years since that war, trained in strategy, feared for her decisions, respected by her people. She wore armor now, laced with threads of energy and tradition. Her title was High Advisor, and her word shaped policy across half the continent. But none of that mattered when the alert flashed across her console. Her fingers froze over the control pad. The name blinked back at her. Incoming vessel, Captain Kale Myron. It was impossible. He was a memory. A ghost from a childhood buried under duty and silence. She had been told he was dead. After the war, her guardian said he had never existed, that her mind had invented him to survive. She had nearly believed it. Nearly. But every time she reached beneath her glove and felt the shape of that tiny wire ring, she remembered. She still wore it. Hidden, quiet. Not for anyone else, only for herself. Now that name had returned. Alive and real. She closed the console and moved quickly, locking the information behind layers of security. If the council found out, if they knew he was here, everything she had built could fall apart. Her people were already divided. Peace hung by a thread, held together by old alliances and fear of more war. A human captain arriving without permission was more than a problem. It was a threat. She sent a private message through an encrypted channel. The words were few. "You shouldn't have come. They'll kill you. Turn back." She pressed send and sat in silence, waiting for something, anything. The seconds passed like years. Then her console blinked again. Audio signal, direct, private. She clicked accept. His voice came through, quiet but steady. "Not leaving. Not without you." Her breath caught. For a moment, she wasn't the advisor or the leader. She was the girl in the shadows again. Cold and lost, staring at a boy who had shown her kindness when no one else did. She closed the channel. This couldn't happen. Not now. Not like this. Kale landed his ship on the far side of the old valley, near the ruins where they had first met. He stepped out into the quiet evening. The wind carried the smell of ash and flowers, a strange mix of past and present. The valley had grown wild since he last stood there. Bioluminescent trees glowed in the distance, and soft moss covered the broken stones. His boots crunched over familiar ground as he walked toward the place he remembered so clearly. He reached it, a fallen column near the center of the ruins. It had once been part of a temple, long forgotten. He stood there, waiting. The silence stretched. Maybe she wouldn't come. Maybe she had forgotten. Or maybe he had been a fool to believe. Then he heard it. A soft step. A movement in the mist. He turned. She stood just beyond the trees, wrapped in dark armor, her hood pulled low. Her blade hung at her side, but it was her eyes that told him everything. Silver. Still the same. She walked closer, slowly, unsure. He took a step forward. "You came," he said. She didn't speak. Her eyes searched his face like she was looking for someone only she could see. Then, in one quick movement, she drew her blade and held it to his throat. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just looked at her. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice low and sharp. "They'll kill us both." "I meant what I said," he replied. "I'll die keeping my promise." The blade didn't move. Neither did he. But something changed in her eyes, something small, something old. Her hand trembled. Slowly, carefully, she lowered the weapon. "I remember," she whispered. He smiled just a little. "So do I." The wind blew between them. A vow once spoken in the dark had returned with light. Kale followed Sarayan through the glowing forest, each step careful and fast. The trees around them shimmered with thin threads of light, pulsing like veins in the dark. The deeper they went, the stranger the world became. Roots that whispered, leaves that hummed in the wind. Sarayan moved like she belonged here, silent, and sure while Kale struggled to keep up. She didn't speak and she didn't look back, but she never let him fall too far behind. That was how he knew she still cared. Behind them, danger was closing in. Small scout drones zipped through the air, scanning for heat and movement. Their smooth silver shapes glowed with sharp blue lights, and their hums echoed like distant thunder. Someone had found out she met him. Someone had sent the machines to erase the past with cold precision. This wasn't just about her breaking the rules. This was about stopping a story before it could be told. When they finally paused, it was in a narrow crevice beneath a jagged hill. The stone walls around them were warm from the sun, but Kale could feel the tension in the air. His chest ached from running and his breath came fast, but he kept his voice calm. "Why are they chasing me?" he asked quietly. Sarayan looked at him, her eyes unreadable. For a moment she didn't answer. Then softly she said, "Because they know you kept your promise, and that kind of truth is dangerous." Kale stared at her, trying to understand, but she didn't explain. She just turned and said, "We can't stay here. I know a place." They moved again, this time slower, more carefully. The land sloped down, and soon they reached a wide ridge. Below it, hidden among tall rocks and vines, was the entrance to an old tunnel. It was sealed, but Sarayan placed her hand against a stone and whispered something in her language. The stone shifted. A hidden door opened. Inside, it was warm and dim. Lights glowed from crystals embedded in the walls. People turned to look. Young, old, injured, tired. These were not soldiers. They were outcasts, rebels, dreamers, people who had chosen love, peace, or freedom, and paid the price. As Sarayan walked past them, quiet nods and faint smiles followed her. At the center of the sanctuary stood a tall woman with long braids and bright, steady eyes. She placed her hand over her heart as Sarayan approached. "You came back," she said, then turned to Kyle. "And you brought him." Sarayan nodded. "He's the reason I came back." The woman studied Kale, then motioned for them to follow. She led them into a smaller chamber lined with old scrolls and glowing maps. On the table in the center, an ancient star chart flickered, with energy. "There's still a way," the woman said. "If you want to claim your choice, Siran, you must do it by the old laws. Speak it openly, before witnesses. No council can undo that." Siran's face was calm, but Kale saw her hands tighten. "What does it mean?" he asked. The woman answered, "It means she has to challenge the one she was promised to. Rothan, in front of the people, a ritual combat. If she wins, her choice becomes law." Kale looked at Siran. "You don't have to fight for me." "I do," she said, quiet but sure. "If I won't fight for my heart, then I've already lost it." The room was silent. Then the woman nodded. "We'll spread the word. The ritual will be held at the dawn light." Word traveled faster than fire. Across Lunera, people whispered of a challenge. Some were shocked. Others were hopeful. A noble had never been challenged this way in over 100 years. Siran had been promised to Rothan since she was 16, a deal meant to keep peace between divided families. To go against it was more than bold. It was dangerous. The morning came with red light painting the cliffs. The ritual ground stood wide and open, a platform of glowing stone that pulsed with ancient power. Only those of strong bloodlines could stand on it without pain. Siran walked onto it without flinching, her armor trimmed with silver and fire. She looked like she had walked out of a dream. Kale stood in the crowd, his heart pounding. He had faced war, storms, and near death, but nothing had ever scared him like this. He couldn't fight this battle for her. He could only watch and hope. Rothan arrived, proud and sharp. His armor was polished, and his face was full of confidence. He looked at Siran like she was a disobedient child. "You shame your name?" he said. Siran didn't answer. She only bowed. The speaker began the ritual. A chant in a language older than cities rose through the air, followed by a long silence. Then the fight began. Rothan struck fast, powerful and trained, but Siran was quicker. She moved like a windstorm, dodging, turning, flowing. Sparks flew as blades clashed. The glowing ground shifted under their feet, responding to their will. The battle was hard. Rothan cut her shoulder. Blood stained her sleeve, but she didn't stop. Her blade danced not just with skill, but with memory. She fought for the boy who had once said, "You look cold," and for the promise he left her with. In one swift move, she disarmed him and placed her blade at his throat. Silence fell. She looked him in the eye and said, "I choose someone who chose me. Not power, not politics, just truth." Rothan dropped to his knees. The crowd erupted, not with noise, but with feeling, half hopeful, half afraid. Something had changed. Kyle stepped forward, breath caught in his chest. But as he reached her side, a distant flash of light caught his eye. High above them, from the tower's edge, a weapon shimmered, a shot fired, and everything changed again. The sound of the shot echoed across the stone terraces, louder than the cheers, louder than the wind. For a moment, everything froze. No one moved, no one spoke. Then Kale dropped. The bullet tore through his shoulder and he collapsed to the ground, blood spreading quickly across the platform. Siran turned instantly, catching him before he fell completely. Her fingers pressed against the wound, panic breaking through the calm mask she always wore. She called for help, but the crowd had already begun to scatter. Shouts rang out. Guards raised weapons. Chaos erupted like a storm. She didn't care about any of it. Her hands trembled as she tried to stop the bleeding. Kyle's face was pale, his breathing shallow. He smiled faintly despite the pain. "You won," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. "Told you I'd stay." "Don't talk," she said, tears filling her eyes. "Just hold on." More voices shouted around them. Rebel medics rushed forward, forming a protective circle. One of them checked Kale's pulse and looked at Siran grimly. "He needs real care. This won't hold long." Siran stood, still holding his hand. Her armor was soaked in his blood. The noise around her was like a blur. She made her choice quickly. "We're taking him to the mountains." Someone gasped. "That's madness." "No one touches him," she snapped. "He saved my life. Now I'll save his." She lifted Kyle with strength she didn't know she still had. He leaned against her, eyes barely open. The crowd parted as she passed, unsure whether to stop her or salute. She didn't. Look at them. Her eyes were on the horizon, the path through the mountain cliffs where an ancient temple still stood, a place older than law and untouched by politics. They traveled in silence. Snow began to fall lightly as they climbed. Each step was steep, but she kept moving. The medics helped when they could, giving Kale pain stims and energy shots to keep him awake. Still, his body was failing. His skin grew colder with each hour, and his breathing slowed. But he never let go of her hand. Last they reached the temple, built into the side of a ridge covered in frozen mist. A stone door marked with symbols glowed faintly. An old priestess waited there, wrapped in white and gold. She looked at Sirayan, then at Kale, and without a word, stepped aside. The door opened. Inside, the temple was warm, lit by soft golden light that came from the stone itself. The air was thick with energy. The runes on the walls pulsed as if they recognized the ones who entered. Sirayan laid Kyle down gently on a stone platform in the center of the room. His blood touched the carvings, but instead of rejecting him, the stone began to glow brighter. "The mountain accepts him," the priestess said quietly. "If the vow is real, it must be spoken now." Sirayan knelt beside him. Her voice shook. "I remember you," she said softly. "Under the broken walls in the smoke. I remember your hands shaking and your voice telling me I looked cold. I remember the ring you gave me, the promise you made. You made me believe I mattered." Kyle opened his eyes, barely. "I remember you too. You were the light in the dark. You were the reason I survived." Sirayan reached under her armor and pulled out the ring he had made for her so long ago. She placed it in his palm. "I choose you," she whispered. "Not for duty, not for peace, for love." The priestess raised her hands. A soft wave of energy passed through the temple. The vow was sealed. The ring glowed faintly, then dimmed again. The room fell quiet. For a moment, there was peace. But peace never lasted long. Outside, the sound of engines roared across the sky. The Empire's ships had arrived. A full fleet hovered above the mountain, weapons aimed and waiting. A message came through loud and sharp. "Sirayan, surrender the human, or be declared an enemy of the state. You have 1 hour." Inside the temple, Kyle struggled to sit up. "They're here," he said through clenched teeth. "I know," she answered, helping him stay upright. "They won't stop." "No," she said, her voice calm. "But neither will we." She walked out onto the temple steps, her sword at her side, her armor still stained with blood. Snow swirled around her as the crowd gathered once again. Rebels, civilians, those who had heard of her victory and come to see what came next. A single voice rose above them all, loud and cold from the lead ship. "This is your final warning." Sirayan raised her hand. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the mountain. "I was told to forget," she said. "Told that my heart was weakness, that love had no place in power. But I remember. I remember kindness when there was none. I remember a promise, made in silence." She pointed to Kale, now leaning against the doorway, his face pale but alive. "You ask me to give him up, I will not. I choose him. I chose him then, and I choose him now." The crowd didn't cheer. They listened. Every face was silent, every heart waiting. A second voice broke through the noise, this one from space. A human diplomat had arrived. His message was simple. "Harm one of our citizens and you declare war." The fleet paused. Then, one by one, the Empire's ships pulled back. The battle never came. Sirayan turned and helped Kale down the temple steps. The people bowed, not because of her title, but because of what she stood for. As the wind calmed and the snow fell gently once more, Kyle looked at her and smiled weakly. What now? She looked out over the world that had almost forgotten what love could do. Now, she said, we start again.